Hello and welcome back to Indus News. Well, we begin this hour with our top story, and that's a high-level Taliban delegation led by one of the founders of the Taliban, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, has arrived in Pakistan for talks. Earlier in the day, US Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad also reached Islamabad to discuss the revival of the Afghan peace process. His trip follows last week's Afghan presidential elections that were marred by a low turnout and violence. Khalilzad reached Islamabad after concluding his visit to China. Meanwhile, Taliban spokesperson Sohail Shaheen said the delegation will hold important talks with the country's officials. The US and Taliban were close to a deal last month when President Trump called off the peace process. Well, for more on this story, we're joined by our correspondent in Islamabad, Isa Naqvi. Isa, thank you for joining us here on Indus News. So let's get into it. We've got a high-level Taliban delegation right here now in Pakistan. It's from one of the founders, and we've also got Zalmay Khalilzad here as well. What more details can you tell us on the ground there in Islamabad?
Uthman, I have two recent updates on the story that we are talking about, and earlier it was only a confirmation from the Taliban spokesperson about these visits. But the two updates that I'm talking about, one, the US Embassy in Islamabad has officially confirmed that their envoy for Afghanistan, Zalmay Khalilzad, is in Islamabad and will be holding important meetings. They have not mentioned a meeting with the delegation of Taliban that is arriving. The second update that I have is about the official confirmation that has just come from the Ministry.
Well, we've lost Isa on the connection, but we'll try to get him back very soon. In the meantime, we'll go to our next story, and as soon as we arrive back to Isa, we'll bring him back and give us the updates on what's going on with the Taliban inside Pakistan. Now, in their fresh act of state terrorism, occupying forces have martyred another youth in Indian-occupied Kashmir's Gandarbal district. 7 youths have now been killed by the occupation forces in Nararanag area of the same district this week. Earlier, Indian forces confessed to arresting over 144 minors since the illegal annexation of the valley. In a report submitted to an Indian Supreme Court committee, they admitted that some of these minors were as young as 9 years old. New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout in Indian-occupied Kashmir has now entered its 59th day. Well, Pakistan's Foreign Office has summoned Indian Deputy High Commissioner Mr. Gaurav Ahluwalia. FO spokesman condemned the unprovoked firing by the Indian occupation forces along the line of control, killing 1 woman and injuring 3 others. Faisal urged the Indian side to respect the 2003 ceasefire arrangement, investigate these and other incidents of ceasefire violations. He also instructed the Indian forces to respect the ceasefire in letter and spirit and maintain peace on the LOC and the working boundary. The Indian occupation forces along the LOC have been continuously targeting civilian populated areas with artillery fire. Well, India has topped the world's league table in curbing freedom of expression on social media. A UK-based tech report says India made the highest number of requests to Facebook and Google for content removal in 7 years. The firm called Comparatech said India has been on the censorship top spot for the last 10 years. It said India made over 77,000 requests for content removal between 2013 and 2018. The tech firm said India makes up 33% of the overall requests for censorship made to Facebook. New Delhi also tops the individual list for requests made to Facebook with 70,000 complaints. Now, Iran has accepted a French proposal for talks on the 2015 nuclear deal. In a televised address, President Hassan Rouhani says the plan suggests a rollback of Iran's nuclear program in accordance with the JCPOA. In return, he said the US will remove all sanctions and would allow Iran to immediately resume oil sales. Rouhani went on to say that the plan needs a slight amendment. Earlier, he said Washington's indecision is undermining the possibility of any negotiations to de-escalate tensions. The president said the US is sending mixed messages on bilateral talks. Well, as the Brexit saga continues, Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the EU should compromise on his Brexit proposals to secure a deal. Johnson is due to submit fresh proposals to the bloc today. Addressing a Conservative Party conference, Prime Minister Johnson said the UK will leave the bloc on the 31st of October with or without a deal. He said his government will boost productivity, increase wages and control immigration. Germany says the EU Commission will examine Mr. Johnson's proposals. Well, Russia has successfully tested its S-500 missile defense system inside Syria. State media says some problems were identified with the equipment, but were quickly eliminated. It says the Russian Defense Ministry has declared the test successful. Earlier, the ministry said the system would be commissioned for the use by the army in the year 2020. The production of the missile system began in June this year. Well, staying with Russia, and they've welcomed Ukraine's decision to give special status to the pro-Russian eastern Donbass region and hold elections there. The peace plan for the conflict-ridden area has stalled last month after Kiev rejected two Russian proposals. Earlier today, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said the Donbass's special status and elections should be written into Ukrainian law. He said these steps were proposed by Moscow as the Steinmeier formula ahead of the Normandy 4 talks over the issue. The Normandy 4 include France, Germany, Ukraine and Russia. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says the date for the talks will be set soon. Donbass is the border area between Russia and Ukraine and has been marred by war since 2014. Well, the US has told North Korea to stop its aggressive acts and remain committed to nuclear negotiations. The statement follows Pyongyang allegedly firing a ballistic missile off its eastern port of Wonsan earlier today. State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortagus said Pyongyang should do its part to ensure peace and stability inside the Korean peninsula. She said North Korea should abide by their obligations under UN Security Council resolutions. Earlier, Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshida Suga said the missile reached Tokyo's exclusive economic zone. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe condemned the launch and expresses concern over Pyongyang's actions.
We'll hold National Security Council and will discuss about the situation and our measures. We'll continue to cooperate with the international community, especially the US, and will take all possible measures to protect the safety of the nationals as we stay on alert.
Libya's Mitiga International Airport in the capital Tripoli has been hit by an airstrike. The UN-recognized government claims the attack was conducted by forces loyal to Eastern Commander Khalifa Haftar. Government officials said the raid set a fire in a factory belonging to the Libyan civil aviation. They say the airport has been closed, but no casualties have been reported so far. Government officials say they also thwarted two ground attacks by Haftar's forces on the Ramla front line. Forces loyal to Haftar launched a campaign in April to capture the capital. Now, according to the World Health Organization, clashes between the two sides have left over 1,000 people dead and wounded nearly 6,000 others. In Spain, Catalan separatists have called for mass civil disobedience if their leaders are convicted for their part in a failed bid for succession. The 12 defendants are on trial for holding a banned referendum and issuing a short-lived declaration of independence. 18,000 protesters have taken to Barcelona's streets to mark the second anniversary of the referendum. Protesters chanted anti-government slogans and called for the release of their jail leaders. The separatist movement has slowed down somewhat, but tensions have flared ahead of the Supreme Court verdict in the case later this month. Well, we'll be back with more news from around the world right after this short break. Hello and welcome back to Indus News. Now, at the Syrian refugee camp Ain Issa, an uncertain future awaits foreign ISIS orphans. Displaced Syrian women volunteer as caretakers say the children are still scarred after losing their parents. More in this report.
In a large tent housing 24 orphans, the female caretakers trace the trauma in these children and fear for their interpersonal development. Aged 18 months to 13 years old, they were born to parents from Russia, Uzbekistan, Indonesia, Tajikistan, Egypt and Iraq. With limited resources, the caretakers aim to create a safe haven for the children to grow in.
They don't like the food. The way they play together is not really playing. They play at shooting each other or planting the mines in the earth. These things are still planted in their heads because there's nothing to make them forget about it. They don't study or go and play with the little ones. It's been taken away from them.
After years of leading the fight against the militants, Syria's Kurds hold thousands in detention camps, 24 of which found their way to Ain Issa. The camp has received no aid for the orphans and is struggling to provide for them despite the many calls to the international community.
The other organizations have not given anything to help the children. We ask for them to give clothes, food, drink as well as to help rehabilitate them to get rid of the ISIS ideology.
As the Syrian war goes on, the affected children look towards a grim future with the remnants of their past still fresh in their minds.
Now, in Norway, a fashion show highlighting the plight of the Kashmiris and their struggle for freedom has been arranged in Oslo. The lineup of the fashion show contained beautiful tunics in multicolored embroideries, which is Kashmir's traditional dress. It wasn't a typical ramp walk. Activism and theatrics added to the spectacle, highlighting the need for preserving the valley's culture. The gesture has been appreciated and particularly lauded by Kashmiris on social media. Now in Russia, clothing brands in Moscow are helping out in continuing the campaign for fair elections with their off-the-wall designs. The quirky looks have boomed in popularity since demonstrations in Moscow sparked a police crackdown that saw thousands detained. More in this report.
A riot policeman snapping handcuffs on a woman as two officers hover nearby with batons is one of the most popular shirt prints amongst young people in Moscow. In July, Russian police arrested activists and students running a campaign for fair local elections. Thousands of Moscowites protested last week demanding the release of the detainees. The items are sold to raise money for their legal defense.
The rallies that were held in Russia last summer started suddenly. We thought it through and created a t-shirt where we're saying that all that matters is freedom and love, that they shouldn't be beating up people.
Sorting the boxes of printed shirts ready for sale, Alina Muzensky, art director at Coltrap, says society is becoming stronger and more aware.
I can see in Instagram stories that there's a large number of young people who have been increasingly paying attention to injustice. That more and more people come to courts, more and more people are not afraid to put on activist clothes.
20,000 demonstrators in a recent rally demanded halt to repression against anti-government politicians and activists who were recently sentenced to 4 years in jail.
Now, sociologists say that if you're going to go for a walk, you don't really leave more than 3 miles away from your home. But one such man, called Matt Green, has decided to ditch the routine of his daily life and walk every single block of New York City. More in this report.
Green is New York's own Forrest Gump. who decided 7.5 years to go off-grid and walk the 5 boroughs of New York City. He believes doing the job right means walking every street, park, and beach. His main assignment is to compile his stories in a blog, what he essentially aims to gather from the experience.
It took about 1.5 years after I finished that walk before I started this one in New York. I had heard of people walking every block of Manhattan, which was just this fascinating idea to me.
Being inspired by Gary Hawes, who walked across America, Green decided he too could pull it off. So about a decade ago, he made the trek across America from Rockaway beaches in New York to Rockaway beaches in Oregon. Green has also ridden every subway in New York within 24 hours.
I know I'll get to everywhere eventually, so I'm never really looking forward to any particular part. Really just keeps me where I am, and it just makes me focus on what's right around me. And when I do that, what I realize is the only reason that people are bored is because they're not focusing on what's around them. It's not a lack of interesting things in the world, it's just a lack of paying attention.
For Green, the experience has provided him with an appreciation for living in the moment.
Now in business news, Pakistan has opened its long-awaited deep-sea Gwadar port for trade. The Ministry of Maritime Affairs says the first shipment will arrive on October the 8th and traffic will gradually increase over the months. Officials say the port's main competitors would be Singapore and Dubai. They say incentives such as no cargo demurrage charges and 3 month storage facilities will help bring business to the port. The modern port is expected to dominate maritime trade traffic through the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean in the near future. European shares have hit a 1-month low over concerns over an intensified global slowdown. Investors' fears grew after a series of dismal factory reports were released across the EU and in the United States. London stocks lost around 1.5% on fresh worries over Brexit ahead of Prime Minister Boris Johnson's final Brexit showdown with the EU. The indices of the Pan-European Stock 600 have also seen their biggest drop of over 1% in 2 months. Frankfurt's DAX 30 and the Paris CAC 40 indexes have also slipped by 1%. Well, it's 27 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore, but we'll be back at the top of the hour with the headlines. Bye-bye.